In an age where hand-drawn animation is becoming increasingly rare, other old-fashioned forms of animation are becoming almost entirely non-existent, such as stop-motion. Stop-motion animation has always been around, but it is currently seeing a resurgence in shows aimed at adults, likely because it was particularly popular with that crowd when they were kids, with the big string of movies particularly surrounding holiday specials at that time. Robot Chicken is probably the most famous example of this today, and from some of the minds behind that show, we're now getting a new stop-motion series on Hulu called Crossing Swords. We got early access to the show and are ready to give you a spoiler-free review, but before we jump into that, just make sure to like and subscribe to this channel so that you can get all of our early cartoon news and reviews. Crossing Swords takes place in an old English-themed fantasy world. Think a low-carb version of Game of Thrones. It follows a boy named Patrick who is a bit of a black sheep in a family full of black sheep. His sister is a pirate queen, his brother is a thief, and his other brother is a failure of a clown. After causing some trouble for his village with his siblings, Patrick decides that he's going to be different than them. He is going to be a good person who makes the world better. He decides to do this by becoming a squire for the king of the land, with the hopes of using this position to help influence the kingdom and make changes for the better. When Patrick eventually gets the job, it is not what he imagined, of course, and he realizes that the royal life is just as crude and evil as the life with his family that he had tried to escape, and that much of his desire to be good is going to be squashed, while his moral strength is going to be challenged. As he gets more deeply entrenched in the politics of the royal court, he finds himself compromising on more and more of his morals, or even has to question whether or not his intents for doing good are actually good for the right reasons. As interesting as the show seems on paper, it's nothing like what it claims to be in practice. The show is, above all else, a comedy. I tend to prefer stories with a more serious approach, where comedy is just a tool to help make the connective tissue of the scenes more entertaining, so I wasn't expecting the show to really appeal to me. The humor mostly is about saying crude things and making use of gore and nudity, all with stop-motion practical and digital effects. Despite this, I actually found myself enjoying the first episode. It was pretty entertaining. By the end of episode 2, however, my opinion had done a complete 180, with me finding the jokes to be uninspired and lacking any cleverness, and future episodes did virtually nothing to change that opinion. The show's creators are best known for their work on Robot Chicken, which makes use of similar comedy but in bite-sized sketches based on existing properties that receive toy lines. When it comes to this kind of humor, skits work really well because you can poke fun at a situation, get it all out, and then move on to something new very quickly. Robot Chicken can make the same jokes over and over again and they'll still feel fresh because you're seeing them in new skits with new characters in new situations. Crossing Swords, however, uses episodic plots, and they don't tend to be very entertaining or even funny, so the comedy is just whatever jokes they're able to force into the script. It feels like the creators were told to make a new show, and they just kind of picked an idea out of a hat, instead of there being a particular idea that they wanted to explore. Episode 3, for instance, follows the characters going on a Kraken-watching cruise that takes a bad turn, with thieves and the Kraken becoming a danger to everyone on board. Another episode sees Patrick and the King going to a magical land in the sky, similar to Jack and the Beanstalk, where society is run almost perfectly. In yet another episode, he escorts the King to a secret meeting of other kings across the land. All of these plots feel like something you would expect from the premise, but none of them tend to do it justice. They are sometimes used to provide some sort of commentary, but it is never particularly intelligent commentary. It always feels like the beginning of some message that they want to share, but they can never really deliver some information on. The humor tends to be them shouting random expletives or something crude and dirty, as opposed to humorous jokes surrounding the plots that they found themselves in. As such, they tend to just feel hollow and unnecessary, a means to an end as opposed to a fun idea. While other animated comedies have their issues, they at least lean into something other than just their humor. BoJack Horseman is an animated comedy that focuses on very serious plots and character journeys. Family Guy uses its episodes to talk about society as a whole and the issues with it, but this show just has a premise for the sake of having a premise. They could change the entire setting and it feels like the jokes would be exactly the same. They're just shoving crude one-liners in wherever possible. There are a few moments before the climax where it does feel like it might lean into something like social commentary, but it always ends up not panning out beyond a few jokes or not quite saying something distinct when given an entire episode's focus, so it ultimately falls flat. The show isn't without its merits, of course, even after episode 1. The further you get into the series, the more you realize that Patrick isn't as perfect as he may seem. He thinks the entire world is selfish, which gets a bit annoying, but he does question if he is wanting to be good for selfish reasons, something adequately foreshadowed in the first episode, even if it was in a way that made him seem unlikable from the get-go. Towards the end, some of the plot elements begin to feel like they take themselves a bit seriously, and characters are allowed to have some drama without it being punctuated by bad jokes. But that build up to those moments just doesn't feel sincere enough for me to feel like I was starting to care about them. The biggest issue for me is that most of the character dynamics are extremely hollow, with everyone existing in their own little bubble instead of developing towards each other in sentimental ways. As such, some side characters often feel like they simply exist for the sake of existing, even though there's no real reason for them to be there. If you like Robot Chicken's type of humor and think that it could still work when filtered into a half-hour-long episode that builds into each other over the course of the season, then you should definitely give this a try. Above all else, it does an interesting job with stop-motion animation. Nothing particularly amazing or groundbreaking, even when it tries to do something serious with less comedic fight scenes, but it is an interesting thing to see in a day and age where animation is being handled largely by computers. Despite that, after making it to the end of Season 1, I'm just not interested in Season 2. But if you do want to check this show out for yourselves, it is coming to Hulu very soon on June 12th, so go ahead and check it out. Just don't forget to come back here and let me know what you thought about it in a comment down below. See you next time!